The following transmission is a conversation with JustWanya, Fallout streamer, modder, and musician. Wanya is perhaps one of the most unique creators I've had the pleasure of interviewing. A passionate individual with a complicated relationship with the Fallout series and an even more complicated past, but a bright and optimistic gaze towards the future. Over the course of our conversation, we'll be talking about Wanya's musical talents, his complicated past both on and off the internet, and the evolution from skeptic to lead dev of his very own DLC sized Fallout mod, Fallout Iron Curtain. I am follower Toshi, and this is the Atomcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow for future episodes and consider subscribing to our Patreon, where your monthly contribution will go towards improving the quality of transmission, keeping episodes ad free, as well as helping to decrease the time between uploads. As always, links to our Patreon, as well as guest socials, can be found in the description. Be sure to leave a comment recommending creators that you'd like to see as future guests. Without further ado, JustWanya. All right, so I wanna start this interview off with a with a funny idea I had just to kind of shake things up, try something new. I want you to tell me your most controversial Fallout take, but specifically because I know that the majority, if not the vast majority, of my audience is English speakers. I want you to tell me your hottest Fallout take in a language other than English.
Ooh. Ähm,
Starting off weird.
bloß weil es bislang nicht da war, heißt es nicht, dass es nicht kennen werden kann.
Well,
Boom. There you go.
if you understood what he just said, tell me about it, because I'm purposely not going to ask him during this conversation. It keeps the mystery alive, keeps the spice fresh. So you are mostly known, I would say, for your Twitch streaming. You stream on Twitch. You play a lot of Fallout centric games. What sort of got you into the live streaming platform? Because for me, when I first got into it, it was is because of the pandemic and I didn't have a whole lot else to do. So it's like, might as well give this a try. But everybody comes into creative art forms in different ways. What did that story look like for you?
Well, I've been a creator basically ever since I remember. Already when I was 5 years old, I was writing my first own little like orchestrated symphony. I was a gifted child, which then was heavily neglected. Classic story, I guess. Um, and I was more focused on like writing and music, and I later also went pretty deep into professional music. So I was a professional drummer for many years. I have over 500 events under my belt as an event technician and drummer. And when the pandemic hit, that job obviously was then suddenly gone because there was like no why how you could get paid. There was nothing happening. Everything was closed, and we had no income. And since I used to be a YouTuber way back then in the 2010s with gaming, I thought like, you know what, let's give this Twitch thing a try because I never did. And it worked out okay. I had a good time with it, and it has stuck around then and became then my new profession. So yeah, I guess I'll take it.
What did your early YouTube stuff cover?
My early YouTube stuff was mostly focused back then on Need for Speed World. I used to be a yeah, I would say pretty okay channel. I did quite hot takes and like how to get the game done and such, but I also used it as a platform to kind of have a little bit of a subtle statement against society very often, which got me quite big then very early. I was at like 72,000 subscribers or something like that before I then decided to nuke it because my takes were very bullshit and I was a very hateful individual as well.
Mm,
So
you're working out
I
your teenage angst through uh racing games on YouTube. I love it. That's Hell yeah.
Yeah, kinda. I mean, like, racing games always have been a thing. That's what got me into gaming initially. But I used gaming a lot, or like my video content a lot to really, yeah, set statements about the world. And many statements back then were definitely beyond the acceptable line
Mm,
and definitely questionable, questionably executed. The purpose, or like rather the intention, was definitely okay. It was a good one, but just the execution wasn't very good, in my opinion, looking back and reflecting on it. And I'm glad that I was able to see that myself at some point and be like, you know what? I know I have 72,000 people here, but who cares? Like, let's just do something else.
yeah. You don't have to get into like, the nitty-gritty of it, but like, every channel has their like most popular video. What was the most popular thing that you made for that channel?
um, um, Ooh, well, let's just say it was a very angry German impression. That's all I will say.
That's fair, especially with German. That's pretty much the it's I
Yeah.
like there's I it's so weird as like an American, especially an American now, and with
Yeah.
like the direction that the country's moving in general. It's
Mm,
weird to sort of like think and reflect on like Germany going through the same, maybe not the exact same thing, but a similar sort of event, and being like pigeonholed to that ideal, or not ideal, but that moment in history to such an nth degree that it almost like defines the nation and its people after that point. But
mm,
more so, it's like especially Germany, because Germany has such like a rich and unique history to it in and of itself, and then all of that kind of gets like overshadowed by like this big, like, the worst thing that could have ever happened in human history. And even though it's like, yes, that is definitely something that should, always be remembered and reflected upon, it's kind of a shame that it overshadows so much of the good that came before and came after. Um and it sounds like in a funny roundabout kind of way that, you are experiencing that same sort of like revitalization that Germany had, to
yeah.
where you had something big and successful that was probably not built on the best of foundations, but you learned from it, and then you came back and you on Twitch specifically continue to have a very strong, a very stable, and very continuous growth and popularity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's dope. Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
Um,
I'm rather modest with it. Very often, I tend to be rather modest with all of that because numbers don't mean much to me in that regard. They did back then, and so I did anything for numbers, and I'm glad that I was able to, you know, grow past that and understand it doesn't really matter. Um, but yeah, yeah.
what is your current outlook on it? What's your mindset there? Is it, building a community, making, a specific kind of environment, statements, stuff like that? I mean, it's a compared to like, YouTube or other content creation platforms like,
Yeah,
TikTok, stuff like that. It's a different sort of process to like make a statement or anything akin to that on a live service, or a live streaming platform. But from what I've
yeah.
seen from some of the streams that I've been or that I've observed from you, it seems more so like community driven. Is that mostly where your hit space is at, or like it? Because it's always interesting to hear like, the internal thought processes of other creators.
Well, I am somebody who just loves to share creation and use creation not only to do subtle statements still, but also to animate other creators to create, because I see lately content creation drifting more towards news reporting of like what's new now, and what is this thing, what is going on in that thing, rather than focusing back on what creation initially, in my opinion, kind of really makes it, and that is art. And a form of art, in my opinion, shouldn't be focused on, hey, what's new, but rather you could take what's new and just report it in a very creative, unique, new way that hasn't been seen hereupon. And lately in content creation, I sadly don't see that so often. I don't see people who come up with their own unique ideas. I don't see people coming up as often with, their own creations, for example, and their own need of expression, if you know what I mean, which is kind of an essential part of art after all. Um, and Everyone can, of course, do the creation that they desire. Oh my goodness! Before that gets, completely misunderstood what I'm saying here.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, but it also makes me kind of sad that, like, wherever you go, mostly it's just, okay, let's play the newest games, make a feedback on that, and move on, rather than also utilizing those games to make a bit more. Like, to give a specific example, if I look at, for example, Fallout 76, when we got the custom worlds, everybody was just using the custom worlds to either build, which was grand, or just to finish their dailies very quickly.
Mhm.
The latter was not as interesting. It's cool that they used that, but what I decided to do was, okay, we're gonna do an RP server. How about that? But we didn't have enough slots. Okay, well, 8 slots are not enough for having a proper RP server with, like, different factions and such. Let's use it for something like permadeath. Let's make like a very tough challenge of the game. Um, Try to utilize that for like for an entire different game, and it actually got quite good. We had I think over 100 permadeathers within just a few months who were trying that challenge, and who were very keen in trying it. A lot of other creators who also joined us on that endeavor and shared it out to the world, and it was absolutely great. And that's kind of the stuff that I live for, and that's the kind of stuff I want to animate people to do. That they use games for more than what just is seen on the surface, because there's so much more to gaming, in my opinion, than just playing a game. There's so much more you can do with that, and I always have been a fan of this idea, which is also why I got into modding all the way back then, because I just saw the potential of, like, getting more out of the game, and also utilizing that, because people nowadays, due to, of course, how the economical situation is, lack more and more in funds. And I think one thing how they can preserve the funds maybe a bit more is to really replay a game and see, okay, what kind of challenge can I do again? Back in the 90s, we did that all the time. We had a video game, played it now through, I'm done with it. How about we do a no death challenge? How about we do a challenge where I'm only allowed to use this and that item and whatnot? And that kind of stuff I am missing lately in the modern day, Like, I don't see that too often in the Fallout community, however, and this is what attracted me initially to do Fallout. It's a whole different level. Like, there are so amazing creators here who do such a great work, who come up with so amazing and creative new ideas, and this is why I feel just right at home here.
Do you think that there's a sort of like an overlap between because you mentioned how a lot of content creators sort of a lot of content creation excuse me, a lot
Mhm.
of content creation sort of feels like it's moving into more like news reporting kind of stuff. Me
Yeah.
myself, I've sort of fallen into that a little bit, talking about specifically, you know, making more like topical talking about things that happen in like the recent news in short form content.
Yeah.
A lot of my like actual content is still mostly like focused in a different place, but it's kind of like for engagement, those like, smaller stories in short form content are sort of easier to, like put out and like keep up attention and stuff like that, especially in the whole
Oh, yeah.
content creation rat race kind of environment. um
Yeah.
but with because like you said, you know there's not enough content creators that are making something that's to that next level of artistic expression, whether it be, essays, role playing servers like you did, or a wide array of different things. You remember back in the day when like you would go on the internet and 90% of it would be like, you know, animated music videos of like fucking Naruto
Mhm.
set to like Linkin Park and shit, and it just
Yeah,
hit
yeah,
so
yeah,
goddamn hard.
yeah. Absolutely, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
that stuff still does exist, but the more that I think people both realize that art is a useful vessel for creative expression, political messaging in general. um there's starting to form like a stronger connectivity between those
Mhm,
two, and especially with like different sorts of communities or organized efforts that we've seen in recent years. It seems that sort of like news reporting has sort of morphed into sort of a creative or ideologically driven endeavor. What have you like given that any thought as to like how that came about or what sort of effect that has on smacking my mic, sorry about that. What sort of effect that has on people's understanding of how to exercise their own creativity.
I think one big problem in that regard, so, like, first the rat race that you mentioned, I don't go for that.
Mhm,
I never was interested in that. For me, it always has been the focus of like, no, use it really to create something new. Um, and while it is creating indeed, to create a video about the news, the content is basically mostly the same. I see a few creators who still use it though, that medium of kind of put their statements in as well, which can be a bit dangerous in news because when it's too much sided into one direction, like news should, for me, as a European, should always have a little bit of a factuality as well. And lately, I've seen a lot of people drifting towards yeah, their own bias in that regard as well, which is of course a very very dangerous uh way to get in. Um, and this is why I decided from the start up, like, yeah, I don't want to be the guy who presents always the newest stuff, and always has to then deal with people who have the biases. Rather, just really show them what else you can do in gaming rather than just like grind, for example. Like, usually in the news is like how to grind this, how to grind that, all the RNG.
mhm,
And all that stuff never really was interesting to me ever since the Need for Speed World Dies. I did it back then. And yes, it gives you a lot of engagement, but I wasn't happy, and that's, I think, a very important factor as well, that we all kind of want to strive for our own happiness, and so people maybe think that RNG will make them happy because they get everything in the game. But what happens when you take a shortcut on your journey and reach the destination? Yeah, then you have reached the destination. Now what? And I think in the human brain and the human mentality, we usually take a voyage not only merely for the goal, we also take it for the journey itself, for the people we meet along the way, for the experiences that we made, for the lessons that we learned, and not just for the mere goal. And all this very news based RNG stuff, should have specified that earlier, is like very much like, okay, this is how you get it fast. And then people get bored in the game and then they have everything and don't know what to do anymore. And I think this is why I'm trying to go against and be like, hey, you can make this an experience. You can rank up in the current season board with chillness. You can just take your time, for example, just to use one example, where people are like, oh yeah, you have to grind this, you have to grind that. There's otherwise how to make the games fun again for you. And it's more about finding what gives you that fun. And if it means that you don't finish something, hey, that's okay. You can finish it some other time. Like, I feel like a lot of games nowadays are very pressured on, like, you have to invest time into me in order to get what you want, rather than just really doubling down and be like, you know what? All I really want from this game is bring me happiness right now, because the world is like hard enough. You have to grind everywhere. You have to grind through your rent. You have to grind through the month with work. You have to grind through groceries. Why would I want to grind also through a video game? And this is why it's kind of sad to me to see the whole community steering more and more towards let's get the recent news, how to grind this, how to grind that, and what's all happening, rather than just taking their own time to find their way. And that's kind of what I'm trying to demonstrate with how I do games and how I do content. That it's absolutely okay to also, sit down for a while and be like, you know what? I like this location. Let's just really take our time and go through that. Who cares about if I finish the season? Who cares about if I get the challenge done now or not? Um, that kind of stuff I think needs to kind of come back again, because as somebody who has been streaming on Twitch for so long, I've been seeing a lot of people who always just want to know, is this weapon any good? Is this any good? Can I do it this way? Can I do it that way? And every time I reply to everybody the same. It's like, find your own way. That's just how it is. Is the weapon good? I don't know. I like it. Might be that you don't like it though, because you are a different human being. You are an own individual. You are not me. I cannot make the decision for you, and it's also unfair to demand me to make the decision for you whether that content is good that you see, because that is also another thing. Content that you see on the internet, it really has a wide range, and nobody is to define what it should be, not even me, even though it sounds now a bit, of course, contradictory to what I said earlier. But no, that's just really how it is. I think people have to understand we are all individual human beings, and therefore we all have different ideals, different uh, uh, preferences and whatnot of all that kind. And I feel like a lot of people are so distanced from their own self that they don't even know anymore what they actually want. And that makes me sad. And this is why I try in my content very often to kind of make people discover themselves again and see different ways how you can attempt a game with different challenges and whatnot to kind of seek some fun again and not just, oh yeah, let's finish this, let's finish that.
Do you think that things like the general concept of like bloat in video games, so like you think back to like the it for me specifically, I usually think back to like Assassin's Creed 2, right? Where you had
Hmm.
to collect 100 arbitrarily placed feathers around the world to get like a specific like skin for your armor, and it's like, that could take a lot of time, especially if you don't have like a game map or anything.
Hmm.
And then we see, a lot of other games that include, you know, seasons events like Fallout 76, which is sort of an outlier in this conversation because it's an
Yeah.
online game and that's sort of one of those things. But then, funnily enough, to also bring it back to Assassin's Creed, I've been playing Assassin's Creed Shadows recently, and unless I'm mistaken on what it actually is, it seems like there's a battle pass in a single player game, which is very strange to me. But like
Okay. Yeah.
the purpose of things, like battle passes and collectathon items and stuff like that, is to maybe not artificially, because it is technically part of the game, but it's not part of like a story or a combat cycle. uh it's just sort of to like get people to play the game more and more, spending more time in it so that they can say, hey, look at all the time that people spent playing our games and stuff like that. Do you think that that has a big contributing factor to some people's viewpoints or approaches to video games? Like you said, you often have people coming into your chat and asking, like, is this any
Yeah.
good? Is
Yeah.
that any good? Do you think that a part of the reason that, people do like those smaller outlier things is because of sort of this maybe not large scale shift, but more so a noticeable introduction of sort of that like bloatware content in video games that is mostly just driven to keep the player playing because it's like, oh, a thing to complete, as opposed to just like playing the game repeatedly because it's something that they enjoy.
Um, that is a question that I'd like to answer with my background from video game development. I was for a little while an environment and game designer for an indie game studio, and I
Rockstar.
have to. No, not Rockstar. Rockstar's definitely not indie with what 2,000, 3,000 people, something like that. They're definitely not indie.
So it
Um,
doesn't matter how many people they have right now. All that matters is that video game companies are getting out of their way to whenever they are planning to release GTA 6. Did you see that? There was like an article that got put out that like at least like 6 other developers are actually delaying their video game because GTA 6 is probably going to launch around the same time and they just don't want to compete with that shit.
I mean, that whole thing is a problem in itself with like competition,
Mhm. Yeah.
competition. That's the word, not competition,
Yeah.
competition. Sorry about that, English people. Still learning, you know. In my personal view, to come back to the original question of the battle pass thingy, um, yeah, it kind of does contribute because it's a very cheap way for investors because they don't have to invest more money into the game company, don't have to pay over hours for developers to come up with cool stories, rather than just have something simple that they can easily reroll. That's a big money saver, of course, and that's the real problem here. Also, now with the GTI thing, of course that they desperately want, of course, to make money, and that's their absolute good right as companies. They need to make money to survive, absolutely. Um, and of course, I can see how one would be worried about GTA 6 coming out that could compete, with your numbers, that people would rather play that than. But it's like, how can I put it the best? Um, you really ask good questions today. I gotta say, this is the most
I
interesting interview I ever got.
I try to throw some hard balls out there every once in a while, keep
Yeah,
people on their
absolutely.
toes.
You're doing fantastic. I love it. I love it. More of these. The more I can practice, then for such difficult questions in the future.
Right.
Um, yeah, no, it's like the money. The money is a big issue in gaming, definitely. Because for one, devs should not go empty-handed. They deserve pay absolutely 100%. On the other, you have, of course, people like investors who have very specific ideas for the video games. They don't just invest money and don't want anything back. Of course, they have some demands for that game as well, and how many copies they want to sell, and how many playing hours, whatnot, so that they can get that money back. And the microtransaction thing, of course, is a massive thing, a massive contributor in that, where investors have um, a very tempting feature that they can use even now in single player games, apparently, as you've just mentioned, to feast on that and make money back again. And on the other hand, I think one can also understand that investors want the money back again as well. But if I look into that creation aspect of it, I feel like that's the misconception about it. Because when we look at creators like us, like you and me, we also have people who have like either on Ko-fi or Patreon, something like that, support us. Yes, we do give content back, but is it exactly the content that these people want all the time? Most likely not. And this is what I think has to kind of get back into the minds of people, that or in that case investors, that they maybe also let the dev studios just do. Because when we look at very grand creations of not even recent years but just in general, some of these were indie game companies that didn't have an investor back then and had just a very grand idea, and that's where the conflict really comes in my opinion. As I had a very similar story as well, where we had a game that was drinking in the game, but drinking is part of the Bavarian culture. It was a Bavarian RPG, and an investor clearly didn't want that in there, and they invested the money, and we're like, yeah, we don't want that in the game. The feature had to be, removed, and people were, of course, very upset about it. Like, why is drinking not a thing in your game? And you sit there, be like, yeah, well, I had to take the money,
Mhm.
and that of course is a big contributor. But to come back to the original question now, it's important for me to get this out there because I feel like a lot of gamers have no idea how it is. um this is why, hence why I mentioned investors, because very often people think we developers just sit there and just, oh yeah, let's do whatever you want. That's not no longer the case unless you're indie, and even then you have to really see what you do with your time and your investment.
Yeah,
um
everybody's always beholden to somebody who has a bigger wallet.
exactly, that's one big problem in our society,
Mhm.
inevitably. But to come back to, like, if that really gets people to replay the or like play the game longer than actually you like playing the game again, as you say, you don't necessarily have to play the game again, if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
Um, like things like just gathering feathers. Yeah, that's something. That's one type of way to animate people. It's not very interactive, of course, because of like a very monotone work, of course, of like collectibles. Some people don't like that. And the battle passes seem to prevail quite a lot. For some reason, I never could care less about them. It doesn't matter which game it is. I never got really into them. I never cared much about them, even when they offer good rewards. Like 76 sometimes has very cool rewards on the list, but I'm always like, you know what? If I don't reach it, doesn't matter. It will come into the atomic shop and anyway. And if it doesn't, hey, that's good as well. For the F1 games, for example, we had before this interview a brief conversation about Formula One.
Mhm.
In the F1 games where I modded the most in my lifetime back then, very often what happened is that they supported the game online services for a while, and then it was shut off once already. Another new one comes out, and then you can still play it in single player, and that's really where you can unlock all this stuff by yourself because it's not that easy to look into the files and just give it to yourself. That's all. That's all I will say here. Maybe you shouldn't do that while the game is live. Cannot recommend doing that. But that's where like modding comes in as well. And
Mhm.
I know that modding is something that not everybody can do, and I totally understand that it's a big sector that many people are afraid of. But it's part of it's also fun to do that. It's part of creation, and as long as you don't go too public with it, as long as you don't try to sell the assets, whatever, or make like a new project with these assets, you are mostly on the safe side as well. Um, and I'm kind of afraid that these kind of um, things get more and more out of people's ideas because I remember days back then in the 2000s where it was very common for us to like, okay, let me see what else I can find in the files of the game and see what I can do with that. That was something that among me and like others that I knew was very common. That we were like, okay, I played the game now. How about we play with cheats? Stuff like that.
Right.
Um, and that is no longer as much a case nowadays, unless people are just really not talking about it. Then okay, then they do the right thing. Everybody playing the way they want. But yeah, I feel like a big contributor, like if you look at Fallout 4, for example, I'm pretty sure Fallout 4 would not have the player count it has nowadays without mods. Let's face it.
Yeah.
Um,
That's kind of
and
always
of
been like Bethesda's like spinal column, you know. That's kind of been the thing
Yeah,
that sort of set them apart from a lot of different developers. The fact that they
exactly.
invest
Yeah.
so much into making sure that their
Mhm.
modding community is so strong because it kind of balances out the fact that they haven't used a different game engine in like 20 years, but can still, you know, put out good games. But the modding scene is really what drives them.
For one, that yes, I mean the Unreal Engine also has been existing since the 90s and only got updates. So Unreal is also existing since ever, basically.
Right. Yeah.
Um, to justify that for a brief moment.
Yeah.
But no,
Because
no, 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 you're absolutely right. Like modders really drive it a lot, and unfortunately, I like the when I joined the Fallout community in the 2020s as a creator, I saw a big amount of people being very supportive of also mods and also understanding that video game development is not that easy. I've never seen it in any other community before. However, in the past 1.5 years, I would say, I see more and more the narrative driving towards, oh yeah, Bethesda just hires modders so that they can do this stuff, which is absolutely wrong as well. Um, and I'm kind of afraid that we will get to the point because when I was modding Battlefield 2 in the 2000s was I think 2005 I think it released. Um, Bethesda, EA back then, not Bethesda, of course. EA made a statement after a while as people had suggestions for improving Battlefield 2 because it wasn't where most people wanted it. I found it okay. And EA was like, yeah, we don't have the funds for that. We cannot do that for you. But you know what we can do? We can give you this BF2 editor, which is like the creation kit for Fallout, but it's actually a creation kit for Battlefield 2. And we had great mods back then, like zombie mods came out left and right. We had Project Reality, which later then transformed into Squad, an actual game, and whatnot. And EA was happy with it, the player base was happy with it, but over time it drove towards the narrative that EA doesn't want to finish the game, they want the modders to fix it.
Mm,
And that then caused EA to at some point tip over and be like, you know what, if that is not appreciated, we're just gonna nuke it. And then we had a thing back then with Need for Speed World where some Polish modders tried to revive the project again after the servers got shut down, and they got sued in the tens of thousands of bucks.
Ooh.
Why? Because EA didn't want to tolerate it anymore. And that is where like a massive amount of fellow game devs or fellow modders back in the day got lost and no longer went into that. And that is of course on EA, but it's also on the people to kind of appreciate it. And this is why, yeah, to come back to the season point of things, of course, then a company tends to be like, you know what? If it's not worth it to offer the game for like, modification through people because it makes us look bad, because people have no longer an understanding of how the development works, we rather just not do that and do the money savvy way and just bring it a battle pass. So
Yeah.
I can totally understand how one could come to that point of thinking of being like, you know what? If it's not appreciated what we do, why are we even doing it? And this is up to us gamers as well to realize of like, hey, okay, development and modding, those are two different things still, because in development you have time schedules, you have an investor, you have money to deal with. We modders have the luxury, and this is one reason why I like being a modder nowadays. We have the luxury that we can take our time with it if we want. We can easily reschedule things, and nobody will batch an eye about it because they know, hey, it's just a mod, it's just a community project, so to say. But so is video game development in itself. It's multiple people with amazing talents coming together. The only difference is they get finally paid for it, and that is the important step to understand there. Why then suddenly, when the money is no longer there, things cannot get completed.
Yeah, because I remember Tim Kaine, because he's got like a YouTube channel and stuff where he just kind of
Yeah.
talks to us every once in
Hmm.
a while. He put out a video a while ago. I can't remember the name of the video, but one of the bits of information they talked about in the video was talking about how like you know if you're gonna be critical about a video game and tell devs like, oh, I don't like this feature, I don't like that feature, it's like it's always good to sort of get feedback on like what
Hmm.
people aren't enjoying about a video game, but
Yeah.
at the same
Absolutely.
time it's a lot more, it feels anyway, and it most likely is true, and you could probably confirm this one way or the other as a former dev, to get more so like positive feedback, like these are the things that I want specifically, or this specifically is the thing that I didn't like and I would like it to be like this way. Because
Hmm.
you always hear so many people like, oh, this part of a game sucks, or like this feature is bad, this is bad, and it's like, okay, well, you know what do you want to see? Because if you just talk about the
Yeah.
things that you don't want to see, then the people who are trying to figure out what the general public wants aren't going to have as big of a pool of data to pull from to figure out, what to actually include. So they're just going to
Hmm.
default to the stuff that historically have made or have made other companies money. And when it
Yes.
comes to most video game development, that's things like, battle passes, bloatware stuff, um, sort of like maybe not being as concerned about like writing quality, because obviously like, oh, that didn't matter, and it's just kind of like more
Yeah.
money that we gotta put into this development for this project that may or may not do well, because we don't really know what's going to do well, because everybody's just complaining and nobody's actually saying
Exactly.
like these are the
Exactly.
things that we want. And
Yeah.
no, just saying we want hot chicks and big guns isn't a good enough answer, Michael. But yeah, you also said, and this more so was interesting to me, because you talked about how like back in the day there used to be you'd go through a game like one time and then like, all right, time to go through it again, but this time we're going to turn on the cheat codes. We're going to give
Yeah.
ourselves like infinite ammo and like max health and stuff like that. More, I mean, it's been a while since like I started noticing this, but like more so in like the modern era, and we're talking about like maybe the past like 10, 15, maybe 20 years of gaming. I'm gonna, you know what, I'm gonna say closer to like 10, 15 years, 20 years, then we're starting to get back into the early 2000s, and I want to go back, man. I'm so old. um but you don't see as many video games with cheat codes anymore.
Yeah.
There's sort of, it feels like at some point that just sort of transitioned out as like, yeah, an interest in modding became like the big thing. And
Mhm.
now we're seeing this sort of change up to where it is still modding to a certain degree, but it's also like accessibility settings.
Mhm.
So like there's this one game a while back, Another Crab's Tale, that's what it was. Or sorry, Another Crab's Treasure. It was a Dark Souls-esque game where you play as a hermit crab on, this big adventure to get your shell
Mm.
back after it was stolen by a shark that's trying to collect taxes. And since you don't know what taxes are, this is all real. I'm not making any of this up. This is
This is
100% real.
amazing. I love that
It's
idea.
it's a great game. You would probably absolutely love it, especially if you're a Dark Souls fan. Um,
Okay.
but and like it's hard like a Dark Souls game, but it's not like
Mm.
punishing like a Dark Souls game.
Mhm.
But in the game, it has like a really big like it has a excuse me, it has a variety of different accessibility options. You can increase, or sorry, you can, oh yeah, you can increase the response window before an enemy attacks. You can
Mhm.
slow down the game's time so that physically can react faster to attacks.
Mm. Mhm.
You can turn off damage for your character. You can, I think there's one to like increase jump height or something like that. But the best one is you play as a hermit crab. So obviously there's different shells that you can collect, and
Yeah.
it's things that you find in the world, soda cans and shot glasses and discarded tennis balls and shit like that, because there's a whole bunch of trash under the ocean.
Mhm.
But the the best shell in the game that you can only get by turning it on in the accessibility options is a gun.
Hmm.
Yeah. And that's just like the one shot thing. You have like max health, max
Ah,
defense, and
yeah.
anything you point it at, you shoot it, and it's game over for that thing. And that goes for like smaller enemies and bosses.
Yeah.
So like you can finish the game real quick if you navigate
Mhm.
it correctly. Um, but to the point, it seems like modding and accessibility options have sort of become the new, cheat codes.
Mhm.
Accessibility options usually don't go, that full extreme to give you like,
Yeah.
max
Yeah.
health and one hit shots and stuff like that. But it's still sort of that same idea of adding that extra layer of either challenge or ease to any specific game. And then, of course, depending on what kind of game it is, just making the game that extra, like, wacky, silly, goofy fun.
Yeah.
With modding, it's the same thing. Certain mods make
Yeah.
the game more challenging. The others turn it into, furry utopia or whatever. Uh,
Mhm.
so what like is that sort of like is that just like the new reality? Like we're not going to get games where there's actual cheat codes, like no more Konami codes. Now it's all just like straight games that can be modded or like will include accessibility options. Is that do you see that as, a persisting thing?
Well, as a little feedback as a former game dev, cheat codes are nothing but codes of the developers that are used for Q&A testing and debug purposes.
Hmm.
Um, so most likely these codes still exist in games. They're just now hidden, basically, or they're just taken out of the game. You need special permissions, whatnot. Um, and yeah, I mean, modding can enable that if a game is modifiable as well. Whenever they release on Unreal, I have the feeling there's barely any mods available because Unreal is hard to modify unless you make a new game yourself and get everything from the marketplace. Um, yeah, accessibility. Yeah, I totally forgot about that. So yeah, I definitely have to redo one of my earlier remarks about that.
Yeah.
uh, which happens. I'm just a human as well.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, I mean, in general, yeah, modding could be like the new thing in that regard of like new challenges and such. I just feel that it's not as present nowadays anymore in many games.
Hmm.
There's not many that I can count where modding became a thing, and if it became a thing, it usually was something that was not very working well. As said, the Bethesda games are a big exception. They are modifiable. They allow modders stuff. They give us permissions on that, which is great because they know that every video game dev essentially was once a modder, and thereby it kind of helps creating new talents. I just feel like a lot of games don't want modding to be a thing anymore because they're just afraid of assets being stolen slash sold, or used for new games, and that is also a legit concern, because it has happened before. Otherwise they wouldn't be so protective of it, and they have a good right on these assets. But it's just, I think we need more companies. This sounds so weird when you say that. We need more companies like Bethesda, um, in this regard.
With like
I'm
modding
happy that
specifically.
yeah, I'm happy that Baldur's Gate 3, that is, for example, one where they were absolutely fine with it and are like, yeah, do whatever you like. We
Mhm.
need more of that again because sooner or later they will run out of good talents. If every game on the market would be now unified under Epic, under the Epic hood on Unreal Engine, would not be modifiable anymore, where do you get the new talents from? Like, you just have to hire on suspicion that somebody knows what they are doing.
Yeah. It's like, "Oh, show us
And
your portfolio." And it's like, I
exactly. And then there's nothing in the portfolio. Like, how's that supposed to work? I mean, they also laid off now a bunch of people in the recent years, as we all have seen, unfortunately. Um, a big wave of that regard. And some don't want to return to gaming anymore, or to video game programming, etc., like everything development wise in that regard. Um, but at some point they will run out, so we will have to go back there eventually. And I'm just hoping that these times happen sooner than later, because yeah, I think that is a big contributor to why it has been so rather stale, in my personal opinion, when it comes to like the gaming market in general. Like, there were great games, don't get me wrong, some of them who allow modding, but like definitely not enough, and not on the scale that I think we could support it. And that's just very sad. It's of course down to, like, legal terms as well, and managers, and you have to kind of rely on investors also backing that up, and especially on people not misbehaving. Because if you think about certain mods that also have been bringing in rather vile content, or like, um, kind of trying to put in their own hateful ideology, whatnot,
Mhm.
when it's like absolutely unnecessary. Things like these, sadly a problem, but you cannot control it. It's like with Minecraft. Yes, you could build a swastika on Minecraft. You still can. You cannot prevent that. You have to rely on people, to have a certain amount of understanding, and you have to rely on them being educated enough, and being grown enough to refrain from such stuff, of course, which isn't easy, and you can never, basically. It's a whole humanitarian issue, in my opinion, in that regard. It's like more like a psychological, not humanitarian, a psychological, in that regard.
I got back into Minecraft recently, and a friend of mine told me how I could get skins on Java Edition, and I'm flipping through skin pages, and it seemed like every like maybe like between 10 and 15 pages, like, oh, there's another swastika. Yep,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah, yeah.
Hitler. There's Black
Yep.
Hitler. That seems that okay.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, there are always going to be things, because it's that sort of like ethos when it comes to modding, like, oh, you can make the game like whatever you want, and some people are
Mm.
just going to make the game whatever they want,
Yeah.
whitewashing specific characters, getting rid of specific characters,
Mm.
injecting some stuff that people would say is problematic, and it's like, that's just always going to be a thing. You allow for player freedom,
Yes.
they're gonna
Yes.
they're gonna exercise that freedom.
Yeah,
um
because the problem is that most people have this misconception that freedom is a basic good that you can just abuse to your own degree, and don't understand that with freedom comes with freedom comes with freedom comes responsibility. That's a very
yeah,
difficult sentence.
yeah.
With freedom comes responsibility. It is very difficult for some people to understand that. For me, it's hard to utter that, apparently.
Apparently.
So, am I that much better? Most likely not. But I think you get the point.
You're
Like, I feel like, as somebody who grew up in a cult, I see so many people who don't know what freedom is, and they don't value it anymore, and think that freedom means you can say whatever you want without anything coming back at you nowadays, which is like, no. your freedom to say what's on your mind is also somebody else's freedom to, contest it. And that's very important to understand. Um, and so also that freedom that you give modders to make amazing content also will result in some people doing vile content. But from my personal experience thus far, if you educate the people enough, if you are capable of really delivering the thought of growth into people's minds, they will eventually sort out those that do vile content. I've been seeing it for a while, at least in the modding community. We, of course, cannot really claim that on the international political stage now, of course. It's a bit of a hot topic there. But you clearly see that the majority is against certain narratives and whatnot. So yeah, that's the thing that's important, that we just really stick together as well. And when we see something that's definitely harmful, also clearly go against it, and yeah, make sure that it doesn't get amplified and whatnot, and yeah, that it eventually drowns and the people themselves kind of grow up and understand that what they did is wrong.
So,
Um, but what's right and what's wrong is always, of course, also a matter of personal morale and perspective and whatnot. That, of course, is another thing. But I'm pretty sure we all can agree there are some things, no matter what you think, there are some things you should not do
mhm,
in that regard.
right.
And I think everybody who has a little bit of humanity left in them knows what's definitely beyond the line, what should not be represented. So some people know it and still support it because they like then putting the responsibility on somebody else. That's something that I have seen with Russians from personal experience over the past years, where it was very normal that they were then like, "Oh no, I didn't. I said that because they said it on the TV." And then you would ask the TV guy, who was like, "Yeah, I only said that because that's the propaganda I'm supposed to read from the government." And then you go
Mhm.
to the government, like, "Ah, I only said that because our leader said so." And then Lydia's like, "Well, I'm not the one responsible. The people elected me." See, like this is then how like this responsibility game plays in as well, and people blame it on somebody else. So I'm pretty certain people know exactly what they are doing. They just don't want to be held accountable for it.
So I wanted to go back and I wanted to ask you about your early years because you said that you were very interested in music, and it's always
Yeah.
sort of interesting seeing the process going from like one thing to another. So like you
Hmm.
talked about uh, being like very good at music when you were young, and then getting into like the Formula One or the Formula One racing scene, and then getting into modding from that. But you said you were in a cult, and that's not really something that I can kind of just like bypass here. So like now I'm
No,
interested
no,
because I've spoken I went when I went to university,
mm-hmm.
my dorm mate at the time had actually been in something that he sort of also described as a cult for I think like 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully it wasn't one of those, we believe in space aliens and we sure do love some Kool-Aid kind of cults. But yeah, I'm interested now. You brought it up. Would you
That's
like
okay. That's
to talk
absolutely
about
fair.
that?
Yeah, sure.
All
I
right.
mean, it's part of my life and who I am after all. And it's a lesser known fact about me. I usually don't bring it up in streams because I know that the mood very fastly can drop into the basement.
Yeah.
Like I was dropped into the basement very often when I was young. Ha
Oh,
ha
geez.
ha.
Mama loved to drink. What can I say?
No, yeah, yeah. I grew up in a cult essentially. My father, he was a U.S. American, and he both my parents have a very religious family, and so I never was given a choice. And yeah, oof, where to start? I'm writing a book about it actually on the sideline whenever I find free time, to make aware of those ways. I will not be able to name names of my own personal security as well,
Naturally.
but they've been sabotaging my life quite by a lot.
Mm.
So to give one example, when I was 13 years old. And now come the old stories. When I was 13 years old,
Back
there
in
was
my
one
day.
picture. There was one picture on social media back then because I'm not that old yet.
Mhm.
Uh, there was a picture on social media, early social media. Um, and well, I was hugging another person, another girl in a skate park. But like it was like a more like a buddy hug,
Mhm.
like arm in arm for the picture, kind of selfie like. And that was enough to get me into trouble.
Mm.
and getting accused of yeah, having sex before marriage.
Mm.
And I actually then had to also sit 2 weeks in a printing factory where I had to work off that labor for a spiritual reintegration work, as they called it,
Mm.
where there were like no doors, so everything was open except, of course, the outside. Um, and you always had like a spiritual brother or sister, depending on your gender, assigned to you who was accompanying you everywhere. Like even on the bathroom stalls, there were no doors; they were there. Things like these. You slept in bunk beds and whatnot. So yeah, that I was in the printing factory quite a few times. For example, even like peeing my pants during a ceremony because my parents didn't let me go to the bathroom. Um, so yeah, things like these.
Mhm.
And when I the more I got repressed back then, the more I fell into creation and music, and also more aggressive music like rock and metal and whatnot. And that was, of course, a big problem because it's so satanic and whatnot.
Of course,
Classic
yeah.
stereotype.
The devil's
And
music.
yeah, the devil's music.
Mhm.
And I decided when I think the first time when I got to a printing factory when I was 10, I decided, yeah, this is not the way. This is not how I want to live for the rest of my life, for just being myself, getting sent away to forced labor, essentially. And this is where I decided, yeah, I will leave at some point and make a music career.
Mhm.
And I risked everything for it. And when I left, it was like an overnight action. So I grabbed all my stuff with just two other people who were involved in that. Moved somewhere else. With everything that we had, we left behind a lot of stuff. Just the most essentials basically were grabbed. And yeah, right. The next following day, there was already like a pamphlet of that very cult in our mailbox, even though my name wasn't even written on the mailbox, and I haven't even officially reported yet that I moved.
Mm.
So they were really ahead of you, and they were really yeah, they were really spying on you essentially. And the best thing that happened back then as well is that the job that I had picked, it was in retail. I picked the job so I could skip some of those ceremonies and be like, yeah, sorry, I have to work. Which wasn't always true. I
Mhm.
have to confess. Oh my God, what? Yeah, insane. Yeah, I'm the sinner here.
Oh,
Um,
no!
yeah, how dare me lie to the elders? And yeah, I use that to kind of build up a second life, for the future beyond that cult where I chose the name Vanya, which I still have nowadays, for a matter
Mhm.
of fact. And I really was very careful because I saw with my older sister who tried to leave how hard it is, and it was a good model for me of like what I should do and what I should not do. And so I worked in a photo specialty store because my father was interested in photography, that he was more likely to, excuse a few things. Like, yeah, okay, he has to work. That's okay. He works with photography. I love photography, whatever.
Mhm.
Um, um, One day I got suddenly fired from that job, and everybody in the whole establishment was just shocked about that because it was a very reliable, very popular employee as well. Yes, I was a bit weird. Yes, I had my ticks like everybody, but still, in general, people were shocked because they knew my performance was great and they could not explain it. Years later, like many years later, when I visited that place again, I met my old department manager, not the one who fired me. That was a different manager,
Mhm.
and he was like, "Yo, hey, would you like to go eat something?" Yeah, sure, absolutely. And we ate, and he was telling me, yeah, the company got sold. And the first day when the company got taken over, the manager who fired you got fired because apparently you took money for firing you.
Hmm.
And that's then where I remembered when I came home on that day where I fired, my parents, for the first time in my life, asked me how I have to work the following week. They never asked the question before, and that made it very suspicious to me. In addition to that, further years later, when I was working in the event industry, one day we got yellow letters to my employer, which were, well, debts from a health insurance, which I didn't even remember that I ever had. It was private health insurance that apparently was written on me by my parents many years ago without me even knowing.
Mhm.
And suddenly I had like 50,000 euros of debt that I had to work off in very heavy night shifts. So they really tried to actively ruin my life. And then COVID came in once that was kind of resolved. And yeah, I kind of then decided, okay, I want to do something else because they know now that I'm in music. They know I'm doing this. How about I go back to my old name,
Mhm.
um, of Vanya and try something different that is a bit off there. That because like I don't see many very religious people in gaming, especially not in something like Fallout. Um, and if they are religious, they are more liberal and more open about it. Tendency, of course.
Or
And
they're American religious to where they don't understand that there's other religions outside of the United States.
or something like that, yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so that was yeah, that was a big comfort. And ever since then I also haven't heard anything much anymore. I even was trying to contact my parents once, because like last year I was like, you know what, let's just see if they maybe have matured up a little bit. We haven't chatted in like 10 years now. Let's see if um there's any remorse, there's any, like let's do it better. But there sadly wasn't. The
Mm.
final message I received was, and I quote, "Because of God, we didn't abort you, and this is how you thank us." So I guess that says everything about these parents and their ideology that you need to know.
Yeah, wow, damn. Jesus,
Yeah,
that's crazy. I didn't talk too much with my former dorm mate about his whole thing, but
yeah,
it seemed like it was kind of the same, but on sort of like
mhm,
a more kind of like bohemian kind of level. It was just like, oh,
okay,
we're gonna, live on a commune and like Jesus is cool and like, we're gonna make our own like
mhm.
furniture and stuff like that. But
Oh,
yeah,
okay, yeah,
still definitely like spiritually based, but not like the whole, God's gonna punish you because you
yeah,
talked to
yeah,
a woman or something like that before you
yeah,
engaged or anything.
yeah.
So you started getting into music as a way to sort of segue out of that position.
Yeah, because
And
I never thought that they would look actively for me if I'm a metal musician, to be honest. And because metal is certainly something that's very devilish, of course.
right.
And well, apparently I was wrong, as we can see. And well, that didn't work out pretty well because the main problem there was that I had, of course, a way different mindset than all the other local musicians, because most people here, they live in quite a luxury. Like, people buy a guitar just to have it in the living room,
Mm.
not to actually make music with it. So this is where like a big conflict of interest was almost everywhere. I played in over 20 bands, and it always has been the same for most musicians that only did music because, yeah, it's a hobby, but not to actually fulfill something in them and to actually set a statement to the world and make something better out of their life from it. So the commitment was like completely unbalanced.
And it was just like you came into it with just it was just more so like a mindset thing rather than
Yeah,
an
I was
experience thing.
always very, very determined, and it had to work. And I was working my ass off like a maniac. Like, I played the drums sometimes like 5 hours a day just to get better at it. And I think looking back on it, now we're retired essentially, because I have no space for a drum kit. And as somebody with a slight disability, it's kind of hard to play the drums on occasions.
Mhm.
Um, I think I did pretty well. Yeah, but I wouldn't call me like, of course, the best. There's always something that, depends a lot on perspective, but I did pretty well in my opinion. And I think it's a talent that I can really think of highly of, because I've seen many, many drummers in these many years, and there were rarely drummers who with whom I could compete, in a quotation mark, of course, because I don't see it as competition really.
Mhm.
Um, but just by the level of skill set, I could see that I have quite a wide range, and also quite, uh, yeah, quite perfectionist and quite on it. And I didn't allow myself too much fun in that regard. For me, it was more like, yeah, you have to be the best and you have to make it work, to make it a music career, to really get away from there, and use the music as well to kind of make a statement about it, about what happened and what kind of systems to be aware of, which I think is way more essential than just pointing out a business with a name, rather just really warn of the system itself so that people can analyze whenever that system comes up again. I think that's way more important than just the name.
Yeah, definitely, because it
Yeah,
gives meaning to the action as opposed to just like a target.
exactly. Yes.
Yeah. You gotta stream like a rhythm game at some point. See if you still got the muscle memory in you.
Oh, I'm pretty certain I do.
Yeah.
I remember there was a gig that I had to play because they didn't find any drummer. And they were asking me, and I haven't drummed at that point like for a year, and let alone that band, not for like I think 2 years, and I still remembered every single song perfectly. The
Nice.
speed was a bit off. I was a bit too fast here and there, because they had no metronome or anything, so I had to go by feelings,
Mhm.
which is always a bit hard, especially when you're nervous. You tend to play a bit faster, but yeah, it was a pretty good one, and I remember that gig quite well because everyone was absolutely freaked out of how I still remembered all these songs so perfectly, and still played them so precisely as if I just practiced them the day before,
Yeah.
which was not the case. I had no idea really. It was just like, okay, just play the first chord and I will know which song that is. That's basically how I've been operating.
Nice. It's just
Yeah,
one of those skill sets you just kind of built with.
yeah.
So how did you go from that to being a drumming music prodigy to modding Need for Speed games? What was the
Uh,
evolution there?
Well, I've always been modding basically. The first game I modded was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 back in 2002, 2003. I think that's the time it released.
I would have gained
Because
so much respect for you if you had said Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1, but you said 3 and that was a pretty good game too. So you
yeah.
get a pass.
Well, I didn't have Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2. We got Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 back then because, the games that we got were, of course, very controlled by our parents. Battlefield 2 was very under the radar. We were very good in sneaking that one in.
Mm,
My brother, essentially, because he was the child that was loved the most, so most things were excused in his case.
right.
Um, yeah, Tony Express got it flipped because they had actually extra PNG files lying around. All the textures were PNG, and they had extra files for the faces lying around that they never used. And so you could have a skull as a face, for example, and whatnot. And I was then doing my own decks and whatnot, my own face, things like these.
Mhm.
I just back then didn't know that it was a thing. That, that this is essentially how video game development works. I was just like, oh yeah, look, I can modify the files. I'm a cheater. Haha.
Right.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Silly dopey me back then.
Just like I can just
Um,
mess with stuff and like, no, you're doing like
exactly.
video game development.
Yeah. It then transferred over to Lego Racers and then Battlefield 2. Minecraft, I did some texture packs back then. Um, Euro Truck Sim and the F1 game series by Codemasters. F1 2010 to 2020, essentially. Now 2023, with the Formula One, which is a crossover between Fallout and Formula One, where I present some races on occasion
Mhm.
whenever they're ready. It's just a lot of fucking work behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Um, we're talking about like thousands of textures that I have to replace every time. So it's like a massive project in itself. And then you also have to like record the rise, which is like 1.5 hours of material. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff to do there to really
Mhm.
present as a proper rise. Can highly recommend you maybe checking it out on YouTube. I have a few uploaded there to kind of see in what kind of style it is now.
Yeah, because you made like a
Um,
very long, like full race event,
exactly. Yeah.
using Fallout inspired cars and skins and stuff a while ago. I
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Like yeah.
I checked out some of it, but I forgot to. I forgot. I was occupied with other stuff and I didn't see the end. Who won? Who ended up winning?
I see. The first season is still on the way because like these races take so much work, and I do them more on the sideline. Actually, I wish I had more time for them because the real problem that I have is I would need a UI overlay because the problem is you cannot modify it. So the drivers' names and the team names in the engine
Mhm.
they are in an encrypted database that even my roommate, who used to work for the national security of our country, couldn't even crack.
Mm.
So that much security barrier. Thanks EA, by the way, who took over Codemasters.
Once
Um,
again,
and
EA.
so what I would need is something like an OPR. I don't know if that is a term that you are acquainted with. So what it basically would what I would need is like a system that detects the pixels on the screen and reads, for example, Verstappen and replaces it like with the PNG file of like the new name tag that I have.
I
Um,
see.
yeah, and I have somebody who was working on it, but it doesn't really work reliably, unfortunately. Unfortunately, on top of that, he's in Turkey, and we know the situation there isn't quite right? Either they have no Discord, they have no Twitter, whatnot. So yeah, it's very hard to get contact
Right.
with him, and I hope you're safe out there if you ever hear that. Yeah,
Hopefully.
so that's like the thing why it takes me so long because I have to edit every single frame of the 1.5 hours as well for like the driver standings as they update on the left side of the monitor, and this is also why it only pops up like once in a few laps,
Mhm.
because otherwise it would just never finish it, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense because especially said because you said it takes like what a half hour just to like get the PNGs onto like one car, and you're dealing with like over a dozens. Like it's a lot of
Yeah,
work, and that was like in
yeah,
the
and
old
then
engine. You're dealing with like a newer
e-
stuff.
exactly, it's a new engine, and also on top of that, like I modified behavior so that they're way faster and they have way more slipstream, so they overtake each other multiple times a lap where like the nameplates are changing back and forth like dozens of times, and it's just really much work. I once for the nuke pre, as we call them,
Mhm,
for the nuke pre of Holland, I outsourced it to my friend Catarella,
mhm.
and also she was absolutely frustrated with it after a while. I was like, man, I don't know why you even do this work. Yeah, I don't know, I just have to. It's just my inner urge, to create. And if it means to really sit through a painful process like this, that's how it shall be.
Yeah,
Like,
that's just kind of how it
yeah,
goes from
yeah,
modding to editing to sound mixing, just all of it.
exactly. Yeah,
It's a pain and a half, but goddamn if the end product isn't usually mostly all the time worth it.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so, yeah, this is why, I always have been into that stuff. And, well, then, when I modded the F1 games more and more in the late 2010s, I got into contact with a studio as well, who were looking for environment designers, which I did before in Battlefield 2, and also a little bit in Unreal for myself. And you know what? That's okay. You work on Unreal. I've been working on Unreal, so let's do it. And I was working then for them from 2020 to 2022, 2023 aroundish. The only problem is that they had massive financial problems. They could not really hire me as like a full-time employee. It would have been more on a like a free agent base where they hire you for like this and that time to do this and that. And that's the maximum of things they could offer. And that of course is a bit sad, but that's just how it is nowadays in video game development. Level
Mhm.
designers are usually um, required only at the start, somewhere after the story is done, or most of the story is done, to build the levels, to build the environment and the map, and then all the other stuff comes in. So yeah, that's a bit of the unfortunate thing there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I then decided to go back into modding Fallout 4, which I've never done before. That was a new challenge to me in 2023, building the submarine back then, which was a big project. And then also working on other teams like Conquered Stories, Shadows of the Old World, and of course Fallout Iron Curtain, which I've got to be the overseer of.
Hell yeah. Excellent.
Yeah.
Big man on campus. What got you interested in Fallout specifically? Cuz, you know, going from like racing games specifically, probably
Mhm,
one of the most classic genres of video games imaginable up there with like, like platforming and stuff.
mhm.
Um, Getting into an RPG specifically centered around the nuclear apocalypse of the American aftermath, the fallout as you oh my god, I just connect no. Can you imagine? Um uh it's quite a shift in genre. You
Yeah.
talked a little bit before about Fallout having sort of like a little bit of a deeper messaging to it in
Mhm.
what it's trying to tell with its narrative story and its world space and stuff. But what specifically was the big attractive thing that sort of got you into this this fandom, this series?
The answer will, I think, surprise you, and it's also kind of bland compared to all the other stuff. My girlfriend.
Oh my god, he's not a Fallout fan. He's got a girlfriend, guys.
So nah, she sadly is no longer with us.
Ah.
Which essentially then got my curiosity. She was obsessed with Fallout back then,
Mhm.
especially Fallout 3 in New Vegas, and I couldn't really understand what's going on there. And Also one of my childhood bullies played Fallout, so I kind of had a bit of a tough time with it. Um, but she loved Fallout, and yeah, I watched her playing a few times, but I couldn't really get into it because I just didn't have the attention span. And yeah, after a major fight, which didn't go so well, she went into drug abuse,
Mm,
and that sadly cost her life, essentially. And there was Fallout 4, and I saw a presentation of it on YouTube of another channel with whom I'm friends with, and they explained Fallout a little bit to me, and I felt like, you know what, the least thing you can do right now, in all that kind of feeling of guilt of not, preventing her from going into drugs, even, was to at least buy it and see if you like it. And I grew to absolutely love it.
mhm.
And there were many tears shed in Fallout 4 for me, multiple ways, especially the beginning is comes up again. There we go.
Right, it's a tearjerker.
I know most people hate the beginning, and I get why. But for me, with that story, it's just yeah, a life bounding experience for sure.
the
And
the intro to Fallout
yeah,
4 is definitely kind of like maybe not a litmus test, but it definitely is one of those writing segments that is very specifically targeted at, maybe not targeted, maybe that's not the proper
yeah,
term,
that,
but
yeah,
it's definitely written for people who can more easily relate to that opening.
yeah,
For example, I haven't gone through half of the things that you've gone through, and I'm not a dad or have a kid or anything,
yeah.
so
Me neither. Not that I know of.
yeah, right. So I mean, you did friend hug that one girl way back in the day, so I mean, who knows, maybe that's how it happens.
Yeah, yeah,
um but like I would imagine that the intro definitely hits a lot different if you're like, a parent, or have
yeah.
lost a close relation
So
in that regard.
yeah.
But it is still a very like well written sequence. It just kind of
Mhm.
definitely hits a different emotional tone for
Yeah.
people susceptible to that sort of narrative structure.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just something that, like, for example, New Vegas intro didn't get me at all. Like, that was, for example, one that I was absolutely uninterested in. And everybody's just, we come back to the topic. Everybody's different and has a different preference there, and that's absolutely okay. So for me, Fallout 4, with that opening was pretty grand. Even though I still didn't care about Sean.
Yeah, especially once
That's
you especially once you talk to him and he says that thing about his mom and you're just like,
yeah.
excuse me.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's like, yeah. I think like there's something for everybody in Fallout. It doesn't matter which Fallout. I think there's something for everybody, and then that's what I love about it. And yeah, just seeing the deep statements about it and like all the aesthetics and such, it really made me fall in love with this franchise in absolutely no time. I was addicted to Fallout when I initially played it the first time in 2015. And I was like so addicted to it that even some friends were like, "Hey, are you still alive?" Like, yeah,
Like,
to
yes,
that
I'm playing
degree. Like,
Fallout.
yeah, and I was like, "Nah, I have to build sanctuary."
My potatoes.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like my settlements. What Sean? Who's Sean? And like,
I don't care. I got farms to rotate.
yeah, yeah. No, no, I absolutely loved it because like it really had like something of everything. It has puzzles in it. It has like statements in it. It has cool stories in it. If you want some lighter stories, you have them too. If you want something like a sim building game, you have that as well. Like it really has like everything in it,
Mhm,
and that's why I think Fallout 4 is a sometimes a bit underappreciated game in the Fallout community. I think like a lot of people give a lot of hate for it because of the main story, and that kind of overshadows everything. But I think the main story is okay.
mhm,
Um, yeah. So like, yeah, how it turns out later, like with Sean being father, that of course, yeah, is a bit weird in like the logical sense of it. But I know how development sometimes works. You lack time. You don't have all the info. It happens.
mhm,
Like, I'm pretty certain that these kind of details I think you can ignore them if you want to. Um, and yeah, this is why Fallout 4 initially has a special place in my heart because that was my introduction, and it was quite a tearful introduction. Yeah, and this is how I was then sold on Fallout, and then Fallout 76 where friend of mine bought the beta access plus Fallout 26 for me as a birthday gift, and later on jumped off a bridge.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's kind of a very tragic story. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
you
hope there
have
will be no Fallout 5. I'm afraid what will happen then.
yeah,
Like, who's the next one to
you're
to pass away? It's like,
you like everybody you've ever known, both for better and for worse, is going to be on the same airplane, and that airplane is just going to like fly
yeah,
into the
it's
Bermuda
like,
Triangle and
yeah,
never be
it's like,
seen again.
man, thanks, kind of stuff.
You got a
No, yeah,
morbid relationship with the Fallout
yeah,
franchise. Oh
like,
my god.
that's the thing. It's trauma. That's
Yeah.
the thing. I'm trauma bonded to Fallout. That must be the thing.
Todd Howard is casting some sort of like black magic on you personally.
Yeah, this is why you gotta really pull out the praying rock every morning with Todd's face on it.
Right? God,
Absolutely.
like
Almighty Todd and Sovereign God, hallowed by your game. It's very important. Yeah.
our Howard who
Sorry,
art in
s-
Bethesda.
yeah. Sorry, Todd, if you ever hear that.
Right. Please stop cursing Wanya. He's just a little guy.
No.
So like
Yeah.
naturally you used your modding skills from modding Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 and Need for Speed games, racing
All the
games.
games over the years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you put that
To
to work in Fallout. What like
Yes.
what was the first direction you took with that? Obviously, a very different kind of game. One that you initially didn't, connect with or vibe with, but then learned to,
Mm.
you got more into it. What was the first sort of, the mod, the thing that you created to sort of take it in a little bit of a different direction? What was that? What was your introduction to it or into the
Um.
space?
So first and foremost, I decided that for survival mode, I want somewhat of a mobile player home where I could just, store all my stuff and have somewhat of fast traveling in a lore-friendly way of like, traveling around on the map. And the first initial thought that I had was a submarine because I love submarines. I don't know what that weird attraction is, maybe because they're fellowship and they have a small PP apparently.
That's definitely
Maybe
usually
something, yeah,
it.
absolutely. We all know that.
Big
Um,
truck. That's the next upgrade. It goes
yeah,
submarine, then it
and
goes big truck.
yeah, I had ideas for a truck, a school bus, and many other things.
Yeah.
Trains, vertibird, airship, all these things. I just made the mistake to kind of stream it and talk it out into the world of all these ideas because other modders feast on it.
Mhm.
Which isn't initially a problem. It's just I would have wished that they would have asked me as well if I wanted to be part of that project.
Yeah.
Because they conquered the hot mods in no time and invited other bigger modders. Where I'm like, okay, you invited a level designer, you as a level designer as the one where you got the idea from. I have the chat logs of my Twitch still there that prove that you got the idea from me.
Right.
Anyway, um, yeah, the submarine, which I decided for be a Soviet submarine, a spy submarine, essentially, a nuclear submarine as well at the same time. And I kind of wanted to use that as a little hint of like Fallout Iron Curtain. Um, and also, the initial idea was that you fix up that submarine so they can travel over into Europe with that submarine, essentially, then. But yeah, is that somebody decided to kind of take the idea one to one, and my viewer numbers were very down in the basement when I was modding
Mhm.
live on Twitch, so I had to kind of get back into like ordinary streaming again. Let's say ordinary streaming quotation marks, of course. Um, and they abused that time quite greatly to then make other mods of mobile player homes, inviting bigger modders and like conquering the whole section with it. And that's they used it smartly. It's just a bit hurtful because here's a guy with Ukrainian background who made the Soviet submarine to make a statement against Russia, and now you can guess what the nationality of the model was who used that concept.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that kind of felt like, yeah, okay, fuck you.
Yeah.
I hope you don't have to censor that out, but yeah, that was initially where I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not having it, and that was a very bad introduction to modding Fallout 4. And I actually initially didn't want to mod any further, to be
Mhm.
honest, because that was just very traumatizing to me in a certain way of like, hey, I put in so much effort because I made this mod in like 1 month, where I worked like every day 12 hours to make it on time because I was invited by Green Fox or Invader Phoenix for the first Merry Modding Days, which is like a thing where they like release every day a mod to the advent calendar,
Mhm.
and that kind of concept over Christmas. And I was invited to that project, and I was like, you know what, that could give me the first outreach. Actually, let's actually go for it.
Yeah.
And so this is why I worked like every day, at least 12 hours on building that submarine. Sometimes I even made like a 24-hour session completely through because I was just insane. I don't know if I would ever do that again to that time degree, but yeah.
Yeah, crunch
Um,
like that definitely drains real quickly.
yeah,
So it's like that's
yeah,
something you can only do like a couple times before it's like, all right, I need to pick a better way to approach these
exactly,
projects.
exactly. And well, then when I kind of, made my frustration, I wouldn't say public, but like more known among trusted a bit more that this experience really downed me. Green Foxel also kind of was like, how about you work projects for Conquered stories, like little cells with own little stories. It doesn't have to be that massive like the submarine. Definitely way smaller, just little because the concept of Conquered stories is that they utilize buildings that you couldn't trespass before, like ported up buildings,
Mhm.
and they spawn doors in them over time so that you can actually visit the interior. And then there's like quests, stories, vendors, dungeons, whatnot, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that is how he kind of really did a very great service, and I cannot thank enough in that regard, because that's what rescued me, because he showed me, hey, there is modders still in the community who actually care and who are not that vile. And you had just a very bad introduction to it, in a very unfortunate way, with somebody who was just a big dickhead.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, that really kind of made me fall in love with modding Fallout 4 again, kind of. And so I was then invited to many other projects. I sadly had to cancel quite a few of those where I was invited to, because I just got so many requests as a level designer, because they were all were like, yeah, you have a good eye for aesthetics, how to put things into perspective, and like with lighting and everything. Um, and yeah. This went then to a degree where even other big modders, like Eleonora, for example, Captain Ultima, Porter Wolf, were also reaching out to me and like complimenting me on my skills. And that really gave me a massive boost, of course, in my confidence again. I was like, you know what? Maybe I really am capable than I think I am. And somebody with whom I used to work in the same studio at was mentioning, why don't you make your own game? You have the talents, kind of something of everything, which is good enough to be a game designer.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, well, I don't want to make a whole new game because I don't even know how to approach this, to be honest. I would have to, have to my own source code and such. I'm not a coder. So I'm like, I'm not into that stuff.
You
And
just
this is
do
then
it
what
you just do it the quick and easy way. You just get in, you just go in, open up the art program, you open up MS Paint, and then you just doodle stuff, and then you just make a digital
yeah,
flip book. Like
yeah.
video game.
You could do it like that, but for me it was always like, no, I think a video game also should be kind of 3D. I want to make an RPG,
Yeah.
if I want to make
Some
a video game, I want to work on something with story, with like, depth. And so
something
this is then where I
bigger.
was like, you know what? Bethesda is so supportive of modders. Why not utilizing that for new mods? And this is then what sparked the idea of Fallout Iron Curtain, because it was like, okay, we have London action right now. We have something regarding Europe. We've seen the Soviet Union again in the Fallout TV show a bit. We have hints in Fallout 76 that says in a White Spring terminal something along these lines, that they had spies on the East Coast and they were trying to, stand back and just, obtain information and secret plans and whatnot. And that kind of sparked the idea a little bit of like, you know what? I'm this kind of guy who lives in Central Europe with both a Western and Eastern European family. I kind of know both sides here.
Yeah.
Why am I not making this? Like, this makes so much sense for me. I live in Germany where the Iron Curtain stood at. It makes so much sense for me in this position to do this mod that is a Fallout in Berlin divided between East and West,
Yeah.
which of course is a big part of the story of the Cold War, and I think it kind of fits perfectly for Fallout.
It definitely is topical.
Yeah.
I think it, because I what was it? I think it was Tim Kaine, or maybe one of the other like main developers
Mhm.
of Fallout.
Mhm.
But I remember them telling a story about like, oh, why was China the chosen as like, oh, like this is the other country that America is rivaling against. Why isn't it
Yeah.
Russia? Russia for the longest time has always been like America's number one
Mhm.
adversary, especially since a lot of the theming in the game is, Cold War,
Yeah.
1950s and 60s stuff like that. And it's like, oh, like that would make a whole lot of sense. And if I'm remembering correctly, their response was that I think they were in Russia on like holiday or something like that, or visiting family or
Mm,
something.
yeah.
And they remember they were in like a hotel or something. And they looked out
Mm,
their window and saw a couple of like a couple of Russian men just like
yeah.
drunkenly stumbling down the road, like, yelling at each other, clearly very still drinking and stuff like that. And he just thought, like,
Yeah.
there's no way these guys could be like the big bad adversary. Look at them. They're all drunk and falling over each other and stuff.
Yeah.
I think he just kind of lucked out in the sense that in the modern political landscape, China has kind of risen to be the actual proper contender to the
Mm,
force that is the United States.
yeah.
For better or worse, the fallout once again came true.
Yeah.
Not digging it.
Yeah, yeah, no, 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 absolutely. I remember a similar story that the original writers back in the '90s, of course, also saw the downfall of the Soviet Union, so they didn't consider it an addition to that already because okay, Soviet Union now fell apart. But that was something that kind of was obvious to happen. Like every empire will collapse after a long while. That's
Mhm.
just how it is because it just becomes too big to manage. It's
Yeah,
just simply as that put. I wish I could say it will not happen to America, and hope that at least if that happens, it happens more peacefully, and all of you over there across the pond will be fine.
fingers
But
crossed.
yeah, fingers crossed, absolutely. But yeah, no, I totally am on the side of Tim Kaine there,
Mhm.
as somebody who, well, I wouldn't say
Living
I have a what's the word? I have a certain experience with a lot of people from the Eastern European continent, and I understand why it was chosen this way, and
right.
this is why it gives me now, of course, the kind of mission of like, you know what? They never, like in the Fallout universe so far, it's not that they denied the Soviet Union wouldn't exist. They rather made clear implications that it in fact does exist. There's also, I think, in Fallout 2, or was it Fallout 1? One of the main characters, I think it was Fallout 1, not yeah, or something like that, that you can play, where like it's mentioned that she's the daughter of a Soviet ambassador in
Yeah.
LA, something like that. So yeah, the implication is clearly there that the Soviet Union in the Fallout universe would still be a thing. And so this is why I kind of see it as a mission now for myself to kind of fill that gap as fast as I can before Bethesda fills it themselves. That would be,
Right.
of course, now the unfortunate thing if that would happen,
That'd
which
be
of course is inevitable. But
yeah.
yeah,
It would still be an interesting story, like even with or without the Soviet Union having fallen pre Great War,
yeah,
or whatever the situation. It would still be interesting to see the aftermath of that region of the
yeah,
world, because like it's already been the precedent for like Fallout London specifically, like they've started
mm,
to explore it. And while it's very unlikely that uh the Bethesda proper is going to explore outside of the United States,
yeah,
um it's still interesting to just like explore and theorize and come up with like, for the community to come up with like their own ideas of like, oh well, what would this look like, or what would this
yeah,
place look like,
mm,
because as as much as some people would like to believe, uh nuclear apocalypse doesn't just happen in America. New York
yeah,
City isn't always the place that Godzilla comes to mess up. Sometimes it is Tokyo.
yeah,
And it's and apocalyptic settings in games always are like, it's like, oh, everything's all beaten and broken and
mm,
messed up and shit. And it's like, well,
yeah,
yeah, but that's not always like the point. The point is like the stories that happen in those world settings, and that can happen anywhere. It's just like
yeah,
the setting is just the backdrop. The actual content is the stories that happen against that backdrop.
yeah.
And what to sort of shift topics here again, we've been seeing sort of like maybe not a rise, but more of like an interest, right? In more and more studios tinkering with AI, both to probably expand and advance their own like character NPC player 2 AI
Yeah.
stuff, making them a little smarter and stuff. But one of the things that a lot more people are starting to become more and more concerned about is AI generated arts and voices and things like that. There was um, there was a bit of a dust up because the character of Aloy from I always like forget which part of the hyphen
Horizon
it's.
Zero Dawn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Horizon is the game and Zero Dawn is the hyphen part, but the Horizon franchise,
Ah.
she had a uh Sony did like a thing where they like did AI of her voice, but they weren't
Mhm.
going to they were showing off something. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah.
Um so there was a whole big conversation about that.
Mhm.
I can't remember if she got well. I mean, she obviously gets paid by the company to voice act and stuff like that. But
Mhm.
the AI when it comes to voice is still a little strange for a lot of people, both inside and outside of the industry. And then what was the other one? There was like a DLC for Ark Survival that
Mhm.
came out. Did you see that the trailer for like some new DLC or update they were doing?
No, I don't follow Arc.
I mean, I don't either, but
Yeah.
this wound up on my feed.
Mhm.
You've seen a lot of like AI generated like artwork, right?
Yeah.
It sort of has like a very similar like shape to it. There's usually like a character in the center of the foreground, and the background usually has this like sweeping pattern to it. A lot of AI
Oh, yeah.
pictures. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
The entire trailer was basically like just a lot of that. It was all like AI driven images and
Okay.
videos and animations and stuff, and
Mhm.
not even like good stuff. Like every once in a while you see some
Yeah.
like AI driven art and you're like, okay, all right, that's not bad. I don't like that it's in there, but
Yeah.
that's not bad. This was not that. This was
Mhm.
very very bad.
Yeah.
And the developers behind Arc, the company behind Arc, actually had to come out and be like, hey, we outsourced the making of this project to like another studio.
Yeah.
We didn't know that this was what they were working with and putting out and stuff.
Mhm.
We're like, this is not okay. This isn't cool. We hear you guys. We're gonna take care of it.
Yeah.
So there's this really big conversation about the use of AI in things from voice replication. It sort of started when I mean, it's not AI, but things like facial regeneration, like they did for I always forget his name. But you've seen Star Wars Rogue One, right?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Yeah, I forget the actor's name. But he had
Yeah,
passed
of
away.
Grand Moff Tarkin,
Yeah, yeah, that
that
was it.
actor, yeah, yeah.
Tarkin.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, he passed away, so they did the whole facial generation thing to bring him back and stuff like that. And that was
Mhm.
kind of like the start of it. And now we're here. But there's like this big, larger conversation around AI being used to create images and voices. And there's this other game. It's called what is it? What is it? I think it's Inzoi, Inzoi. It's supposed to be like
Mhm.
the competitor to the Sims and stuff like that. Um,
Okay, yeah.
and they're using a similar sort of AI generation technology, but it's being used in a different sort of way. It's like you can take a picture of like, your face or like specific like graphics or images and stuff,
Mhm. Mhm.
and superimpose them to like, turn your character in, you turn a picture of your face into your character's face, or impose like a specific, like you got a specific t-shirt that you really like or a specific image, you can
Mhm.
then take that and it'll be AI generated onto a t-shirt to make it like look realistic and natural and stuff.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of concern about just their use of AI in the game because, it's artificial intelligence.
Hmm.
And so much so that they had to put out a statement where they're like, all the AI stuff that we're using is, it's done by proprietary models and stuff. This is all stuff that we're doing like in house. We don't outsource or get assets from anywhere else that's not copyright free,
Hmm.
free use stuff. And any of the things that you put into the system, like there's no online connectivity, so like we don't get that doesn't communicate with external servers. It only exists like on your game, so we're not like gathering information and data from there, because there is
Yeah.
this bigger conversation around like data privacy and like the use of AI and stuff like that. As
Hmm.
a former developer yourself, and as like a modder, a current modder, and perhaps maybe more so importantly, a content creator,
Yeah.
what is your general understanding and general like opinion when it comes to AI and how it can be used in video games?
Yes, it might be faster, and yes, it might be cheaper, but the question is if it's meaningful. Because the fact that a human being has spent countless of hours to like dedicatedly produce something and express themselves to the world with something like a simple t-shirt, for example, is just astonishing when it also could have been done in 5 minutes by a machine, because it shows how serious they are about this product, about this thing that they are talking about, that they stand to, and how important it is to them. So if it's important to them, maybe it should then also raise our own curiosity to explore that, whether it may contain a deeper value that we just didn't, see thereupon until we were able to see that piece itself. But with AI art, we are taking that away. An idea is um basically then reduced, to like this kind of like, oh yeah, wishy-washy style and whatever, um and I get that people want quality and think that a human will never be able to deliver high quality, but quality takes time to practice. Even for the for the AI, it takes time to practice that. As we have seen, it had to be trained for so long. And the experiment of AI, I think, has shown us and everyone to us that even the machine requires that. And how is an artist supposed to master the quality when a technology takes it away? And the thing is, you will not always have the machine available to you as well. We have it ever so often. Like we just had the talk before this interview about Sony Vegas versus DaVinci Resolve. Let us
Mhm.
just have that your PC just doesn't work, or that a software doesn't work. What are you going to do then? You still need the practice outside of that. Like AI can be a very good help for like filters, or like um detecting errors in your like your writing and stuff like that. That is where I think AI is absolutely okay to use, because it doesn't replace the one who wields the tool. AI is a tool, and it should never replace the artist, because it really takes away the meaning of the art itself.
Mhm.
Because except just the fact that somebody worked, let's say, a whole month every day, 12 hours on a submarine. Okay, most likely that was very important to them. Let's discover it and let's see what they've done then. Maybe there are some points that I never thought about that are actually quite good about humanity and what else that kind of can shape my own way of thinking, my own view on the world, and can confront me with points I never been confronted with. But when you outsource that to an AI, that point might be lost. Um, yes, you can order the AI to, do this and that, as well, or like include this and that point. But the question is if it will do it with the same emotion, because the problem is, of course, that a machine, most likely, I'm not saying, like we don't know. Maybe do have emotions. Maybe they have a conscience. We don't know. um, but yeah, like they don't have the emotion, and that's like the problem. The emotion is what connects us. That's what makes us human. That's what also makes animals attached to us, and vice versa. It's the emotion. And when we no longer have the emotion, we cannot connect. You see that a lot in certain groups on the world that have no empathy anymore, of how disconnected they are to the world and how trapped they are in their own ideology, and no longer interact with humans in a proper way, if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
Um, and I think especially you in America have seen that now quite a lot by somebody who's just simply empathetic less. That word doesn't even exist, but who's just really not empathetic about anyone or anything and just really wants to further their own goals.
Mhm.
And that is, I think, something very vital in that discussion that we have to consider. There's a difference between a swingful line and aggressive dotting, when you leave an imprint on a canvas, as to use like kind of an analogy here. Those kind of little nuances are missing as well. And those are nuances that you only can learn. Growth never stops for a human being. The moment you think it stops and you don't allow yourself to grow, you are stopped being a human being, because we're all just traumatized children, even when we are adults already.
Right.
Um, and that is like then where many people come around like, yeah, but why do artists then sell the work? Why they want to make, money? Well, because they deserve it. It takes years of practice to get it perfect and to be more precise with it and to be faster with it. Like best example, when you are a cashier at the supermarket, the first day, you will be slow like a goddamn turtle that was drunk on like some very massive alcohol.
Right.
But
Yeah.
do it for a year and you will be fast like a machine,
Mhm.
And this is the most important thing about it. We are replacing artists and literature and whatnot. Why are we doing that? Why are they not replacing the jobs of the hardworking people, which would, of course, be more luxurious for everybody? That is the question that people have to ask themselves about it without wanting to get too political. All these companies are not replacing the hard jobs, they're replacing the creative jobs where somebody with a creative mind is required, and they do it on purpose. Otherwise, it would not look this way. I
It's
remember
because
when I was
they're
working as a retail sales assistant, how they were talking about, oh yeah, and still they haven't. All right, still they haven't. Why? Because they need those hard workers. They need those hard workers way more than they need because creative minds are very dangerous because they can come up with a very unique solution around the system and they don't want the system to change. That is initially why they focus on that. And that's a very strong belief of mine. Because yeah, creativity is something that's required in like you creative new solutions for different kinds of problems. And the moment you don't have somebody who has new solutions to trouble the system or whatever, um, and is forced to be in a hardworking job, they will not have the time to get creative at all. So this is why taking the skill away will highly benefit those in power and those who have the money, of course. And this is why the whole AI topic goes way deeper than just the art itself. It is really a systematic thing, and I clearly can see that as somebody who grew up in systematic environments where power was tried to be taken away from us constantly.
yeah.
And when you take the power to even learn a skill like creativity, of course, that serves you perfectly as the oppressor.
I feel like a
And
big
that's, I
part of
think,
it
yeah,
I feel like a big part of it is also like on the company side, it's the increased level of like, trying to squeeze as much money as you can
yes,
out of a finished product.
absolutely.
Because usually the things, and you could probably attest to this more so as a former developer than I can as somebody who barely even knows how to play video games, let alone make them. But it seems like usually like the parts that are the most expensive are the parts that involve that human creativity level, the
Yes.
writers, the people who make music, the people who
Yeah.
develop artwork that the 3D animators can then take to animate on top of. So it seems
Mhm.
like from a business perspective, the most logical conclusion is to try to utilize AI, which is relatively cheap, relatively expensive, usually in most situations, uh, you know, cost effective and productive,
Yeah.
to replace those specifically higher cost attributes. But the
Yeah.
downside is because AI is still sort of like in its infancy, and you can still very easily recognize AI driven visuals or writing or art or anything like that.
Mhm.
It just comes across as a lot more blatantly profit driven, because like we talked about before,
Yeah.
what was it game developers, they don't get enough positive feedback on what players want to see in a video game, so they'll always just
Mm.
default to the most historically
Yes.
cost earning features.
Mm.
And when it comes to AI, the use of AI, rather, it's the same thing. You can replace
Yes.
this element and that element, and if the player base doesn't, make a big deal about it, or maybe makes a big deal but keeps buying stuff like that anyway, then nothing really changes. It's sort of the flattening out of the video game experience, because it's all based on cost driven wants and needs. And as you also said, it's the it's the nature of a business to try to make the most money that they can, but it's
Yeah.
a bit more complicated when you're in a business that caters to the artistic and the creative, designing and creating an artistic product, an artistic medium, to then take that process and get rid of the things that actually make something artistic or interesting, and just make it a product. Because I feel like there are plenty of people who are like big, like sneakerheads, and definitely like fans of like shoe designs and stuff like that. But at the end of the
Yeah.
day, a shoe has like a very specific utilitarian purpose.
Yeah.
There is a degree of artistic expression to, like, shoes and footwear and stuff, but usually it's for, it still has at its core a specific reason. Art doesn't really have that. Art is, as the
Oh,
saying goes, in the eye of the beholder. So it's always going to be perceived as different.
okay. Well, that is quite an interesting take on that. Firstly, let's start with like saving money. Yes, it is a big money saving tool. As I said, is it cheaper? Yes,
Mhm.
but it really is a thing where like your product, basically speaking, you don't help yourself because sooner or later, especially on the long run, if you do products all are AI generated, you don't working for it anymore. Eventually, they'll become very bland, and people will not buy it because they're then more interested in stuff that's very unique and very different. And that's exactly what another human being will do then. This
Yeah.
is why AI was able to rise in the first place. Different. It was something that not human made, and this is why it essentially became interest, and gotten interest in the first place. And yes, indeed, it is very money saving. Art, however, I think has a very, very strong purpose, no matter if you like the art that you see or not. That is not the point. The thing is that art forms the world, as the world also forms the art.
Mhm.
If we haven't had art at all, imagine how bland life would be. It is inevitable. You can never cancel art. It will always be somewhere. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean that it's not art. And also, art has this purpose to brighten up the life. And that's something that I think a lot of people kind of forget about because art is in so many things. And yeah, this is kind of like the thing of like artist in the eye of the beholder. I think that this quote often gets put a little bit out of context because what I see in that quote rather, and that is of course now a very philosophical conversation that we're having here, that's dictating how it's to be understood, just the way how I understand it,
Yeah, like we're
is
we're
that it
we're
that
definitely we're definitely on the same page. It's definitely just
yes,
like
yes,
two slightly different interpretations of the opinion.
exactly,
Mostly
exactly.
because you
Um,
have a much deeper connection to artistic expression, and in this case specifically
yeah,
video game development, than I do. But yeah, we
yeah, which
to
which also makes me biased,
yeah,
which is also important to understand here.
yeah.
But as I said, the quote of like artist in the eye of behold, I always understood it more of like, okay, it depends more of like whether you see the art in something or not.
Mhm.
Some people don't see the art in level design. That's absolutely okay. Maybe one day they will. When they see something and be like, oh, this is beautiful. Yeah, this is the moment where it has hit you. This is the moment where it has impacted you. And that's I think what art initially does. And shoes, for example, great example. Sometimes you see a shoe that just attracts you more than other shoes, and that's what art is. It's very deep in the core of us humans. You cannot deny that it doesn't that you cannot deny that it does have a purpose because it's so engraved in who we are as humans.
Mhm.
We love aesthetics. We can value aesthetics to each different degree. Some people don't like Shakespeare. I cannot understand that at all because, okay, whatever. But that's exactly the point. Due to us being individuals, we value different types of art, which therefore means that it's omnipresent. That's the thing. It's omnipresent, and you cannot deny it. And which is also why I think art will survive this big wave of AI, inevitably. But I just really wish that the artists wouldn't have to suffer for it because initially we are talking about people's existences there and the whole, yeah, just the whole being that kind of depends on art right now because they are artists and they then have to resort back to like normal jobs like being a cashier. And the thing is, everybody has different talents. I, for example, I'm very bad with numbers. I could never be a cashier. I don't know how to calculate proper. I have a calculator for that that helps me. That kind of, rejects the art of math.
Yeah.
Yes, it indeed does. But this is exactly why I think AI art will always be a thing in the future to a certain degree. But I'm pretty sure that we will only have it ever so often like a calculator. That is something that some people may use, some others may not. It kind of compensates for those who don't want to develop that creative spirit, even though I truly believe that everybody has something creative in them. They just haven't been able to unleash it yet and find it yet because everybody has a different uh, sort of creativity. One is very creative in the way of thinking, the other one is another one is very it's like always like
I'm
that's a
gonna
very
I'm gonna
wicked
I'm
one.
gonna have to
It's
I'm gonna have to pause here real quick. You cut
yes.
out a little bit there. I think what you were saying is one is very one form of artistic expression is very thought based, while the other is very like feeling based. Was that what you
Yeah,
said there?
yeah,
Yeah, you cut out there, so
yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that
Yeah,
that got
absolutely
through.
fair. Don't worry.
Yeah, but yeah, it does feel like because like you said, AI definitely is like very good at like specific things. When it comes
Yeah.
to artistic things, I feel like it's definitely a very good jumping off point. I've
Mhm.
known people who have used AI art generation programs to create like a base concept idea, and then have either
Mm.
like drawn over that concept themselves or use that concept to then help spark their
Yeah,
own creative vision
yeah.
or ideal of like what they wanted this piece to look
Mm.
like. But when you just like go with that like draft one, like this is the art, you really
Yeah.
quickly get responses from people who are like, oh well, this is just lazy because you're not actually putting in any creative work, you're just hitting a button on the computer.
Yeah, as somebody who's a modder and a game dev, I never objected it when somebody uses it as a placeholder until they find the actual artist, until they find the actual voice actor, whatever. Sometimes, especially in development, you have to go to a specific why through development, and sometimes a placeholder can be useful. I still refuse to use it myself, but I work on teams where they do that.
Mhm.
Um, and I can understand the decision making behind it because they want to finish off, like the writing something, want to finish the timing of when an NPC. Then you kind of need like a placeholder for that. I get it. Um, but yeah, in those kind of things, I can understand it. I would, however, be very careful of it as using it as a placeholder and showing it off to the public because that could definitely give off a wrong message. Absolutely. But yeah, I've been working with teams where they do that on occasion as a placeholder and really only as that, which also has sparked in those teams a bit of turmoil, of course. I had it once in one team that was kind of funny where the team lead has AI generated like a scene of like Fallout Terminal, and such, just so that they have a placeholder on the website, which wasn't even published at that point yet.
Mhm.
And people were very mad about that. And so I sat down and just built that in the engine myself in like just like an hour. Something was like, hey, how about you just use this one?
Yeah.
But that was because I had the extra time in my hand,
Yeah.
But it's essentially, I think placeholders, yeah. I get when people use it. I'm not a fan of it. Don't get me wrong. I don't know if I would ever use placeholders myself unless really absolutely necessary. If like really everything breaks and I have to do that. Sure, of course. But I mean, Fallout Iron Curtain was initially a project of two people, and one of them is no longer with that project because he was going so much for AI, he didn't do anything himself anymore. And that was initially a turn off. because yeah, it kind of also how can I put it? It kind of educates a person, like in this personal experience with that specific person here of Fallout Iron Curtain. um, it educates them to no longer do anything anymore
Mm,
sometimes.
yeah.
And he had a very hard time, and I hope that he will kind of like get better again, because what basically happened is that he used AI to this degree that he started to feel worthless and be like, you know what, if AI can, need AI to do that, maybe I'm just like, worthless and just not a good writer, even though he has it in him. That's the idea, is he just never sits down and writes it down because he just doesn't, for some reason. He doesn't get the energy, whatever.
Yeah.
That's something that he has to, of course, figure out for himself. Which is also ultimately why I'm giving him this break now of like, okay, you go figure this out. But it essentially has turned him into a lot of like, self-loathing individual who's okay, even I human being, why am I even doing this, and that's just very, very sad.
Yeah.
That's another danger, and this is why I've been um very distanced from that, but I've seen it first person, and lost basically a team member who was with me together, team lead. That was the idea, that we're both like the lead writers of that project, and now I'm all alone and have to rewrite everything again because sure that he doesn't get offended if I use kind of his side and whatnot,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. But yeah, um, yeah, this is why, yeah, it is to be enjoyed with a grain of salt, certainly. Yes,
Yeah, it is definitely a
but
very like replacement tool, kind of like
yes, exactly.
kind of like
I would consider that like with a pocket calculator. Like I can count in my hand. It's not the problem. But if it just needed on the side and for just something tiny, yes, I use the pocket calculator.
yeah.
Um, But like, yeah, in that regard, yeah, I think placeholders are okay. I'm not necessarily them, but I would certainly also not use placeholders as like a publishing post. Like you've told earlier about the Arc project there.
Yeah, I'll have to send you
Yeah.
the trailer on that. It's
Oh yeah, definitely.
wild.
Yeah.
It's absolutely wild how they thought that that was going to fly. Like,
Yeah.
oh boy. um, but we talked about a lot of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Mostly specifically with AI, because it always feels like AI, especially in like the last, man, even in just like the last like 2 years, like year and a half, it's become like
Mm,
such a big, almost like monumental, uh just like anxiety inducing, like paradigm shifting thing. um
yeah.
but that's just kind of the era we live in. Every year there's some big new paradigm shifting thing, right?
Yeah, and
um
unfortunately, our bureaucracy is a bit slow in catching up on regulation, because I think that would help a lot if there was just more regulation to it as well. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We have, I think the closest thing is like California, in the United States anyway.
Yeah. Mm,
California like recently passed, maybe like last year or something, passed
mm,
a bill that like partially addresses like data privacy and data rights or something, more so specifically like
yeah.
data rights.
Mm,
And that's like one state out of 50, not counting the federal government. So it's like, yeah, and that's even before talking about AI. Like AI was like is still relatively new. They passed a law about something that was kind of a concern, like 4 years ago, and now here's AI, and every month there it's just becoming crazier and more intelligent and more broad, and it's outpacing people so fast that it just feels so anxiety inducing, especially, with everything else that's happening in the world these days. What is something
mhm.
that you always try to sort of, in those moments of like high stress or high anxiety, or, like bleakness or dourness, like, oh man, just like everything
Yeah.
sucks, it's gonna suck for a long time. What's some of those things that you either like tell yourself or return to, to you know help you continue to progress through the hard times?
It's art. Yeah. Essentially, it's art and also creating art. I think there's no big inspiration in life itself. And I usually convert that energy, so to speak, of all this, all the grimness, all the depression. I tend to use it and convert it into stories, into, like level building, all that stuff. That's usually what I use it for. Um, and I think it's a very great vent as well in that regard because you also feel productive afterwards, and it helps a lot in yeah, getting rid of that stuff.
That's good. That's a good. It's a good ending. I think. I always try to
Yeah,
end on something like
yeah,
positive
more
and like
positive.
uplifting.
Yes.
Like yeah, especially if like the thing like right before it is like,
Mhm.
man, shit sure does suck, right? And you're like, yeah, yeah, it sucks. Like yeah, and like, so what do you like? You like puppies? Like what? What's the good thing?
Yeah. No, yeah,
Um,
it's creating and also see what other people create, that's why art is and art and literature and all that stuff is so important because that's really what rescues me very often from like all the glumness of it. And especially when I can like create myself. This is why I think everybody has a bit of creativity in them. I absolutely believe in that. It's just finding the right thing that you like to create. Some people like to create drama, for example. Some others like to create stories, whatnot. Just it can be just for your own self. That's absolutely fair. You don't have to share it with the world either. But I would appreciate if people would share it with the world so I can see it as well.
right, because it's cool. Some of it's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I've had former friends and bosses that I've often asked them like what do you do like creatively, like you're not working and stuff like that, like what are you doing, and then I'd get some people responding like I don't really have anything like that. I'm like, you
Mm,
should. It's a fantastic outlet, even if it's something that you don't do to like put up on the internet to get money or try to sell it or
exactly.
anything like that. It's like you
Yeah.
should have that sort of creative outlet because like everybody has the intrinsic abilities to be creative, and there's varying degree, like people will have varying degrees of like oh, like I don't really need to be creative, or some people are just like, oh man, I need to be creative, right? There's varying
Yeah.
levels, and being able to fulfill that level to whatever degree you need to is, I think,
Mhm.
important for a lot of people. Thank you for listening to my conversation with JustWanya, Fallout streamer, modder, and musician. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow to be notified of future episodes, and consider subscribing to our Patreon, where your monthly contribution will go towards improving the quality of transmission, helping keep episodes ad free, and helping to decrease the time between uploads. Until next time, dear listener, I thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all out there in the wasteland.